In this episode, I speak to crystal expert and award-winning author Nicholas Pearson. Nicholas has been involved in all aspects of the mineral kingdom for nearly 3 decades. He is considered a foremost expert on crystals, combining his background in mineral science with his love of healing, spirituality, and folklore. In this episode, we discuss Nicholas's latest book, Crystal Basics Pocket Encyclopedia, the energetic, healing, and spiritual power of 450 gemstones. Nicholas offers connections between mineral science and the metaphysics of crystal healing. And some of the things we discuss are the basics of crystal healing, how they work, how to cleanse them, and how to charge crystals and program them, as well as so much more. And those might seem like sort of the basics, if you will, of crystals, but my gosh, there's so much more to it. And there's a lot of takeaway for every level of crystal practitioner, whether you are a serious collector, whether you are somebody who works with crystals as a healer, or you're just attracted to them. This is the crystal episode for you. So it's a super interesting, jam-packed interview, so much so that it had to be edited into 2 episodes. I hope you enjoy Crystals with Nicholas Pearson. So thank you so much for being here today and chatting with me about crystals.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on the show. And it's great to reconnect.
So this morning I said to my husband, yeah, well, Nicholas Pearson I'm interviewing him today, and he's a really awesome crystal expert. And I was explaining to him that, I said, wow, over the years since we first met, when you came on Open Minds and you were talking about,
The 7 archetypal stones, my very first book.
Yes, thank you. The 7 archetypal stones. And I said, wow, in that time, like your knowledge has just, I feel like really deepened and expanded so much. You've incorporated so beautifully in this tiny book, your background of geology and interest of science, and then through your own passion, as you say in the book, through your own passion and exploration of crystals, you realized that there was a pattern amongst, whatever their healing properties were. So congratulations on all of the books, because each one is unique. So thank you. I just wanted to say amazing knowledge, amazing information, and it just continues to expand. So well done on all of your work.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a labor of love, and it will remain that way. I can plan on writing until I'm unable to, whatever that means. So I've got so many projects planned and so many different facets I want to explore.
Yeah, amazing. It's cool. So because we can go in so many directions with crystals, I wanted to start with basics.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So what are crystals?
That's a great place to get started. So, crystals in a materials science kind of setting, we define a crystal as a usually solid substance, maybe more on that later, that has a regular composition. In other words, it's the same ingredients through and through, and they have a repeating and symmetrical structure. Now, in a perfect world, given enough time and space, when something with this crystal structure grows, it will have room to create these kind of beautiful geometric faces. We think of crystals as being bound by these external geometrical planes and faces and angles. Like when you hold up a quartz crystal or a piece of beryl like this emerald, we see that hexagonal outline. We see those nice surfaces that meet at regular and predictable angles. But the truth is that even if you have something like a piece of flint like this right here, this is made out of tiny, tiny crystals that we can't see with the naked eye, but they're still there. And what we think of as crystal energy all hinges on this regularity, on this symmetry, on the order that's within them.
Okay. And so for people that might think that's a bit sciencey, on a sort of more simplistic level, what does that information mean? How can that help us when we're thinking of crystals or considering crystals?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, let's compare the amount of order we find in a crystal to the lack thereof in us. The reason crystals are so popular, I mean, there are lots, but I think one of the ones that has pervaded all ages of human history, far into prehistory even, is that we are relatively unorganized. And I only mean that from like a material perspective. The stuff we're made out of varies. We don't have the same composition through and through. My brain is made out of slightly different ingredients than my lungs or my toenails, and that's like purposeful. We need to have different functions carried out by different parts of us. But energetically speaking, we can demonstrate that there is an energy field that surrounds and permeates our entire body. We can demonstrate that this energy field influences and is influenced by consciousness, by the world around us, and that there is a direct correlation between the state of this field and our well-being, our state of being on every level. And it's in constant flux. It's always changing. Whereas a piece of fluorite always has the same fundamental qualities because it's always made out of the same stuff that's always arranged in the same shapes, no matter what color we see, what external shape it's been cut or polished into or naturally grew inside. It's always the same thing. There's a regularity about it. And that coherency, that level of order or organization at the molecular level, is mirrored in its energy field. So when we bring that level of coherence or organization into a state of communion with our lack of coherence or lack of organization, it helps us become a little bit more organized, energetically speaking. It brings us through this state of entrainment. It's kind of like syncing things up or tuning, like we use tuning forks to help us tune an instrument to come into the correct pitch. It helps us come into a state of energetic resonance that is more ordered. And although we don't have rich and robust data that's been done with crystals specifically, we do have rich and robust data that says that the more coherent the human energy field is, the more balanced we feel. There's a very strong correlation between the organization of us on that subtle level and our health, body, mind, and spirit put together.
Is that why people are drawn to a specific crystal when they maybe go into a store and they're suddenly feeling a certain way and they're like, oh my gosh, I really had to have this crystal? Maybe their resonance perhaps is a little bit unbeknownst to them. Something's off physically in the body and energetically it's speaking to them. And so they're being drawn to that beautiful rose quartz or something a little more unusual that they may not have heard before and they're just not sure why.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that, our whole being, not just the body, but the mind, the spirit, the subtle bits of us have an innate intelligence and seek out the things that will bring us back into balance. Animals do this with foods and plants and things that they will eat outside of their normal diet to come into a state of wellness. And I think we do it in our own way as well. And on the flip side, sometimes we're really drawn to something because we're already in resonance with it. Something like Petersite, for example, is a pretty rare and unusual thing, but it has this kind of organized chaos in it. And my life is very much organized chaos. And from the moment I saw my first piece of Petersite as like a 13 or 14-year-old, I was in love. I just had to have it. I just immediately connected. And it's not the kind of stone a lot of people feel that same state of resonance with. So it didn't necessarily represent something outside of me that I needed, but it certainly represented the way I tend to operate. So, sometimes we're drawn to things because they're what we need. Sometimes we're drawn to things because it affirms who we are. And sometimes we can even be repelled by the things we need the most because it is so foreign to us that integrating that could feel uncomfortable. And sometimes that's a really powerful lesson.
Yeah, beautiful. And it's so true. So quickly, what was the Petersite? What are the qualities of that stone?
Petersite is sometimes described as the tempest stone. When you see a beautifully polished piece, it looks like these kind of swirling storm clouds. And, I live here in Florida. I'm a native Floridian through and through. Storms and I are old friends. It's just part of the fabric of society here. So I'm already enchanted because I love that kind of imagery, that symbolism, but it can help us weather the storms in life. When there is chaos on the outside, it helps us cultivate that kind of inner calm, that inner space that we need, the eye of the storm, so to speak, so that way we can move through that with a little bit more grace. And one of the ways that we cultivate that kind of inner resilience is through knowing thyself, is through this kind of stepping into your personal power, your personal truth, and allowing that to drive you forward.
Thank you for sharing that. I just wanted to ask because I'm sure people have never heard of Petersite, so I would want to have known what are the qualities of that stone. And on the topic of stones, are all crystals classified stones, rocks, or minerals, or are there aspects of all of those?
Oh, this is a great one to get into as well. So let's take that word crystal and let's
Mhm.
compare it to a mineral. So all minerals are crystals. Not all crystals are necessarily minerals, and we'll make that clear in just a moment. But a mineral is defined as a naturally occurring inorganic crystal. So we have those same two fundamental things that make up crystals, the regular order and the regular composition. So ingredients are always the same, and they're always put into the same shape molecules. When we couple those two with the fact that it is made by nature and it is made by inorganic processes, in other words, not by living things, then we end up with minerals. So quartz is a mineral, calcite is a mineral, hematite is a mineral, salt usually is a mineral, ice is a mineral when it happens.
Why do you say salt usually is a mineral?
Well, because, we can grow it ourselves. It's not technically a mineral if we grow it ourselves. Same with ice. If it falls out of the sky or forms on the polar ice caps, it's a mineral. But if it happens in our freezer, it's a human-led process and not a natural one. So technically, it doesn't meet that fourth criterion.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
Yeah. So minerals are essentially natural crystalline things that happen in nature. They are the building blocks of the geosphere, the part of the earth that is made out of rock, and we'll say rock-like things. And rocks, on the other hand, are what happen when minerals come together. So like a formal definition of a rock would be an aggregate of one or more minerals. So rather than being a single crystal, it is many crystals formed together. We could sometimes see those crystals with the naked eye. If you polish a slab of granite, like in a countertop or a tile on your floor, you can see the individual grains that are inside it, the bits of mica, the bits of quartz and feldspar, sometimes garnets and other minerals will be in there. Other times we look at a rock like flint or maybe marble, and it's hard to see the individual crystals that are in there because they're so small and they interlock so well. But regardless, whether it is many minerals or a single mineral, we still have this kind of conglomeration of individual crystals or individual minerals that come together to make it up.
Okay. And so tell me, again, coming back to sort of the, I guess, resonance with the body, we humans are also made up of crystals, right? Can you explain this and how, like, how do crystals reside within us as well?
Yeah, so there are lots of things that are crystalline, or we'll say quasi-crystalline in the body. We have some pretty identifiable solid substances like calcium phosphate crystals that are in our teeth and bones to give them physical structure. We have some things like the histone molecules and other proteins that we find inside every cell that are quasi-crystalline. They're nearly there. We have hemoglobin in our blood has two different crystal forms, whether it's bonded to oxygen or to waste. So the molecule itself changes shape, but it has that same kind of periodicity, the way it repeats that symmetrical structure, regardless. And then we've got a whole host of things that are nearly crystalline, or they're not solid crystals, like the case of water. So water is a really interesting case because in an idealized world, without certain kinds of intervention, water wants to be organized, and it's because of the way water molecules are polar. Although they're neutral electrically, when we consider the whole molecule, there are regions of it that are kind of positively charged or negatively charged, electromagnetically speaking. And so just like opposite poles of a magnet attract, the opposite poles on a polar molecule also attract. And the fact that water molecules aren't so rigid, the angles between its components can bend a little bit. It can organize in a lot of ways that closely resemble all 7 of the crystal groups that we use to classify minerals.
Yeah, it's so
Yeah.
interesting, isn't it? It's like when you look at snowflakes, for example, you can totally see that organizing power, and how if you catch one, not necessarily on your skin, which might be warm in the air with snowflakes, but if you have clothing and you let it settle, right, you can see the patterns and how it mimics that as well. It's such I find water is such a fascinating element, isn't it?
It really is. And it's what we're mostly made out of. We think of by mass or by weight, the average human is maybe about 70-75% or so water. It's actually much more when we're very, very young, especially in utero, and much less as we age. But if you do it by molecular count, if you tally up the total number of molecules that you're made out of, because water molecules are extraordinarily tiny, it takes a lot of them to make about 70% by mass. So you're actually 99%, slightly more than 99% water molecules by molecular count. So if water in its idealized form should self-organize as a liquid crystal, what we call a liquid crystal mesophase. Meso means in the middle of, so it's a state in between liquidity and crystallinity. It exhibits the features of both. Then we are almost entirely crystalline in a perfect world. But things get in the way of that.
Okay, cool. So when people are choosing crystals, does the size of the crystal matter?
Yes and no. There are a lot of people out there who will say that the size is totally irrelevant. Just get what works for you. And on a practical sense, yeah, that's true. But consider if we think of crystals kind of like antennas, and we compare it to a standard kind of analog antenna, the bigger that antenna is, the farther it can transmit signals, and from farther away it can receive signals. So if I have these two emeralds right here,
Yeah.
one is in matrix, but if we look at the size of those two crystals, one of
Mm,
them clearly is a bigger antenna. One of them is therefore going to be more effective, more capable at distributing or sending out that signal from farther away. Another analogy we could use is kind of like volume. The bigger the crystal is, like the bigger the speaker, the louder its potential is. But I want to make the distinction that louder is not better. Louder is just louder. If you're working for you, if you're carrying something in the pocket or laying something on the body, it is effective to speak in a whisper.
or
Whisper.
wearing it as earrings, right? Like sometimes
Right,
you might have tiny amethysts or something.
right. So you don't always need to shout to get your point across. So we have to think about things in a practical kind of sense. I'm not going to take an emerald this big and hang it from my earlobe. Maybe someone else might, but that's not my jam. So we do have to think about the kind of practical sense. Are we working in a very localized space? Is it okay to do something really small for that? Is it more practical, more efficient, safer? Because no matter how much you might want to, no matter how much someone's heart chakra needs it, that 35-pound piece of rose quartz is not effective to place on someone's chest,
Right.
right? So we have to kind of temper all the theoretical with the practical, but there's something closely related to size that I think is also worth mentioning. And in a sense, not all crystals are made equal, because it's not just size that we can consider, but we can think about the quality of the raw material. If something has fewer inclusions or fewer imperfections, fewer extraneous ingredients, then it's going to have a more pure and coherent signal. So even these two emeralds that I've got, we can't do like a one-to-one comparison, because they don't have the same ratio of mica schist on them. This one has much more iron in it than this one does, and that affects things as well. So we want to consider everything from an individual perspective and just let them be themselves. If you've got a really pale, transparent amethyst with not much color that weighs 20 pounds, but a small 1-inch amethyst that is absolutely flawless and like grape jelly purple, they're going to feel very different. They're going to have different personalities because they weren't made to be equivalent. So it's not just size. It's, how saturated is it with its color? How free of inclusions is it? Is it attached to a matrix? Are there other minerals present? And all of these things influence energy. So rather than trying to make a single rule, bigger is better, smaller is quieter, however we want to think of that analogy, we have to also contemplate all the other things that go into it. And at the beginning, if that's overwhelming, buy what you like, work with that. Don't worry about the details, but you'll start to notice that every crystal has its own personality, and that is in part because no two are exactly the same.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And it reminded me of, if say somebody's selecting a diamond, people that are buying a traditional engagement ring might think like this, right? I need to get a really big, or I wish I could afford a huge diamond ring. But really when it comes down to it is you can have a giant diamond, but if it's flawed and doesn't have that fire contained within it, it obviously won't cost you enormous amount of money, but it won't be as unique, right? And then you can find a beautiful tiny, point something of a carat diamond that's super sparkly and has incredible radiance to it, and you can feel, it's so special, it's so meaningful to you because it has that, that radiance in it. I think Or I might be wrong, but what do you think? Is that a sort of fair comparison to think of with all crystals? Because diamonds are also crystals. They come from the earth just like amethyst does.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one small addendum that I'll add to this for the healing perspective is that inclusions don't necessarily harm the end result, depending on your form of practice. There's a school of crystal healing called gemstone energy medicine or gem therapy, where we use extraordinarily high quality gemstone, mostly in spherical shape. So they have their own kinds of quality parameters. They only use about the top 1 to 2% of any gem rough to make tools from. And that's
Right.
kind of a school separate to most forms of crystal healing. But here we've got two citrines that I'm holding up, and one of them is very hard to see through, and one of them there's really good clarity on.
Mm.
That doesn't mean one of them is inherently better than the other, but one analogy we could make is, think of something perfect and free of inclusions and absolutely transparent as being kind of like that laser light. It's very, very concentrated, and we could think of it as coherent energy. It's going to be very focused. Whereas something with more inclusions can be more diffuse. It's kind of like a flashlight. Now, a laser beam and a flashlight are both very useful tools, but they have different applications. So just because you can't afford that, perfect, flawless 10-carat diamond that people can see from a mile away, doesn't mean that that 1-carat included diamond you got lacks therapeutic qualities. It's just a different kind of energy, just like with size and just like all the other parameters we've talked about. So we just want to meet them as individuals, just like we have to meet people as individuals, even though we're more or less made out of all the same stuff as one another.
That's a really good comparison, and a good way for people to think of when they're purchasing or they've been attracted to a certain crystal. Sometimes it also needs to sit there for some time. I had the crystal that I sent you a photo of, for example. I saw it about a year ago, and I was drawn to it, but I was like, there's something about it that seemed, it lacked luster, let's say, or like there was a quality to it that I could sense, but it also was really speaking to me. And it's quite large. And I got it last week, the other day. And so it came into my life, and I quite unexpectedly, and I was like, oh my gosh, here it is. And when I brought it home, even in that moment, I was like, wow, it really needs some love. And I sent you that photo because I wouldn't, was like, what do you think about how do you feel about cleaning this? So let's talk about cleaning crystals and how to cleanse them. And then if let's lead into, after that, the difference between programming and charging, and if that's the same. But I only cleansed this one the other night, and it looks so different to, gosh, when I brought it home on whatever day that was, Friday. So I've had it in my home for a week now, almost a week, and it was gray. And what was really interesting, after washing it, I put it in the sink. I covered it in Himalayan salt in the sink. I let water drain off of it. Then I put it on a towel and I dried it for the first day in the sun. In my house last weekend was -23 up here in Vermont. Was not going to put it in the snow or in the earth. And then you had this great suggestion of putting clay, and I had bentonite clay at home. So I made a mask for it, as I would for my skin. And I painted the bentonite clay over the entire crystal. And I let that just sit on it. And then I washed it, and I had to carry it into the shower, actually, to place it on the floor so the water from the shower could get into all the little nooks and crannies of the crystal. And afterwards, when I let it dry, and of course it was a beautiful full moon this weekend, and we're still receiving the energy of that, I placed it in a part of my home that receives full sun in the day and then the full moonlight at night. And oh my gosh, I'm going to just lift it up. It's quite heavy, but I want to show you how it looks now. It's like so different. So there she is now, looking a lot happier. And you can actually see little bits of rainbow light through it. It was so heavy, I'm red in the face. But what was really unique, what I noticed about it after I took a little bit of, when I was washing the clay off, I used a copper scourer, and to get off things like old price tag stickers. It had obviously been passed through stores and had never been rinsed or anything. It's a Lemurian crystal.
Mm.
It's got striations. It's like illustrations across so many, and I know it came from Brazil, and I was like, wow. And so now I haven't worked with it yet, but it's just been kind of sitting, and there's a happy vibe to it now. It feels very happy, and it's been thanking me. So tell us, how do we clean crystals? I know I just shared my method based on some of the advice you gave me, but this is for a very specific type of that needed. So how can we clean our crystals? And then what does it mean to program them and to charge them?
So let's start with, why do we cleanse? I think this is a good kind of foundation that's also going to describe what happens with charging and programming. So crystals have memory. They are recorders. They have these little, we'll say, vacancies in the crystal lattice, because nature's perfectly imperfect. So far, we've talked about the theoretical, the hypothetical perfect crystal lattice, but I mean, nature has these beautiful, happy little mistakes all throughout it, just like throughout our lives. And those are places where energy or information can be stored temporarily or long term, doesn't really matter. So cleansing is a means of releasing whatever is stored, energetically speaking, in that crystal lattice. And we do this because it's kind of like writing on a chalkboard. Eventually, you run out of space. So if you want to write anything else there, you have to wipe everything off, or at least wipe enough off to continue recording on that. That's why we cleanse, because not everything the crystal remembers is necessarily aligned with our goal, our intention, the reason we're working with it. That doesn't inherently mean it's good or bad. It's just not in alignment with purpose. And I really like to avoid the good energy or bad energy labels in this, because crystals don't determine one as being inherently good or inherently bad. They're
Yeah.
just got better memory than we do,
Mm-hmm.
for whatever that means
Well,
for
they've
us.
just absorbed, right? They've just, wherever
Right.
they've been in their environment, they've absorbed, and they might have happened to have, negative thing. It might have been a negative environment and it absorbed. That doesn't mean it's going to harm you.
Exactly. So cleansing is a means of letting all that stuff go. And we can cleanse with a variety of methods. Now, I want to point out that the quartz that you went through this process with is quite stable in water and salt. There are other minerals that could easily be damaged by these things.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. Yeah,
Your
and I knew
total,
that about quartz.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that quartz also won't bleach in the sun like amethyst or kunzite or a bunch of other stones might. So we always want to be mindful when cleansing our crystals that whatever methodology we choose is safe for the mineral species or gem variety that we're working with. So if you're not very savvy on all of those things, I kind of break down the science of it, real basic level, avoid water if the hardness is below this, or if it has these other characteristics, avoid salt for these reasons, and so on and so forth, in the big crystal basics. And there's some of that also in the Pocket Encyclopedia. But at the end of the day, I love to use techniques that are safe for all of my stones. And they're techniques that I think are going to feel familiar to a lot of people. So something like cleansing by smoke, which is found in traditions worldwide. And that could be any cleansing herb or botanical that works for you and your spiritual tradition. But I do get, we can't always burn things. Like sometimes, when Cheryl comes into the office on Tuesday and makes an energetic mess of the place, and you got to cleanse your favorite citrine that's on your office desk, you can't always just light up some sage or frankincense or cedar. You get some funny looks, right?
Yeah.
So we could maybe do something like sound cleansing. That's something that's safe for all crystals. And one of my favorites that I teach a lot is a little meditation that uses the breath to cleanse. And if we breathe with the right intention, with the right visualization, and with the right kind of mechanics, we generate a tiny ionic charge, a little bit of electricity. Plus, we've got all that subtle energy that we can't measure, that kind of spiritual energy. And that's an easy way to cleanse.
Can you demonstrate that? Because I liked that description in the Crystal Basics Pocket Encyclopedia book, and when I read that. But what I visualized was almost a breath of fire technique and exhaling over the crystal through my nose. That was what came to
Yeah.
my mind. So could you just demonstrate a little bit or walk us through how to do that practice?
Sure. And you're spot on. It is very similar to that kind of breath of fire or fire breath technique that we find in some of the yogic traditions. So, let's say I want to cleanse this little piece of citrine. Where possible, I'm going to hold it between thumb and forefinger of one hand. Quartz is hexagonal, so it's got 6 faces along the edges. And I could also hold it in opposite thumb and forefinger along any 2 of those. So I could pick any 2 that are opposite each other and do that. If you have an irregularly shaped stone, just hold it whatever way feels good. And if you've got something too big, like my thumb and forefinger are never going to reach on this ammonite fossil, I'll just hold it in the palms of my hand. I'm not going to get fussy about that. And then we want to set the internal focus on what we're doing. I like to couple that with visualization. So I will mentally affirm to myself, I am cleansing this crystal by breath. And then
And do you name the crystal? Do you say this bloodstone, I'm going to be cleansing you?
if you
You
like,
know.
if you're a visual person, you might just pick it. If you go by feeling, then you might do it by feeling. So you don't necessarily have to have a verbal script if that's not your mental strength, but just kind of set that intention one way or another. And then find a visualization that symbolizes cleansing. For me, I use just pure white light, but someone else who's maybe more tactile could picture like a fresh ocean breeze, or maybe the sound of a cool river flowing through the mountains, just whatever kind of sensory input, anything that works for you, just so we kind of get that almost like cellular resonance, like you feel the state of cleansing. So I do that with visualizing white light. I wait until I feel really saturated with it. I breathe in cleansing, I exhale stuff that is not cleansing until I am filled with this intention, with this energy. And then we fill our lungs, we connect to the crystal and release the breath in a short and sharp exhale through the nose, which looks quite boring from far away, just like that. And with a hexagonal crystal like this piece of quartz, if I'm holding it, with two pairs of fingers like this, I'm going to turn it and I'll do that breath 3 times. I'll pick 2 pairs of faces each time. If you have an irregular stone, like this piece of Laya stone from Somerset, I'll probably just exhale on one face and the other. If you have a sphere, there's only one surface. So do what works for you. There's not like a specific formula you have to follow each time, but these are the kind of general steps. And when we have that coupled mechanics of the forced or pulsed exhale through the nose and the visualization behind it, then we have both the physics of that tiny little ionic charge we're generating, plus the subtle energy that we can't measure because it doesn't adhere to physics. It's metaphysics. It's beyond the physical. And it really kind of wipes the slate clean. And the great news about this technique is you always have your breath.
Yeah.
You may not always have a singing bowl or the full moon. Something may be water soluble or could get scratched to high heavens in salt, but you've always got your breath. And if something is too delicate to breathe on, you're probably not using it in your healing practice anyway. Let's be honest. It deserves to sit behind glass someplace where it can't even collect dust. And I've met mineral specimens like that. I own one or two, and I, meditate with them from far away because I don't want to damage them.
And you're totally right. The breath is always with us. And even if we're traveling and we feel like we've maybe been somewhere where we were exposed to something a little more negative or something else, it's so easy. You can do it on an airplane. So it's a nice technique. Now, then how does that relate to charging and programming?
So I want to unpack the word charging real fast. The connotation of this word has changed over, the last few decades, significantly over the last 10 years or so, because we predominantly use that word with reference to our devices. Whatever portable stuff we've got with us, a laptop, a tablet, our cell phones, of course. And in today's world, we don't go anywhere without these. When crystal healing really started as a movement, those kinds of portable devices didn't exist. And then even as it began to expand through the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, not everybody had them. So we didn't think of charging with regards to like changing the charge level in a battery. Charging, when viewed in this kind of mystical or spiritual or therapeutic context, originally comes from the idea of to carry out a task. Just like we can carry a specific energetic quotient in that battery, we can fill it with something. We can also charge something with the responsibility of protecting us, keeping us grounded. So charging originally just kind of meant imbuing a task or inviting something to participate in an end goal. And that's changed as our technology has. So one of the kind of forerunners of the modern crystal healing movement, he was a computer scientist by the name of Marcel Vogel.
Yeah.
He described this technique as programming, and that's what I first learned it as, and that's always what stuck with me.
Well,
And
because also he came from IBM. It's quite fascinating, his background.
absolutely. So, the idea of installing or inviting the crystal to participate in a specific program, a kind of software that you're using, and that's programming. Programming is really just that setting of the focus. It could
And he
be
invented the Vogel crystal. I'm sorry to cut you off there, but and maybe share a bit about the Vogel crystal and how different and unique that is, that that's hand cut in a very specific way.
It is. And there are lots of people who also have hand cut tools, largely inspired by Marcel Vogel. So, to make a very long story very short, he had no interest in psychic phenomena or the spiritual. He was familiar with quartz because they use quartz to make oscillators in the computer. And one thing led to another, and he started working with quartz crystals kind of by happenstance. But the way it worked out is he was shown this image of the crystal shape inspired by the Kabbalah, the tree of life, and hand cut his first wand in this kind of double terminated shape inspired by that. And eventually found other people with better lapidary skills than him to innovate and improve upon the technique. But he was trying to generate very specific bandwidths, very specific frequencies, we could say, that had specific functions. That doesn't mean that all crystals have to be cut in this way to be effective, just that for the specific school that he taught, it was the tool he was seeking. He used other tools as well, just like in gemstone energy medicine, we use gemstone spheres. That is their idealized tool. Doesn't mean all the others are invalid. But a lot of his techniques and teachings went on to color the rest of the crystal healing movement. So, programming and charging initially were synonymous. Nowadays, when most people talk about charging, the techniques they're describing are actually cleansing techniques. And it's just because of a dilution of the meaning and the change of connotation in the word charge. But we could think of the word charge as imbuing something with an outside energy, because crystals have memory. Not only can they remember a focus, an intention, a goal we're working on, but we can also kind of treat them as batteries to temporarily hold on to an external charge that we use to power that energy. So maybe you charge something with full moon light, you can cleanse it in full moon. You could also charge it to carry that energy. And it's a finite thing, it's going to run out of that. You could charge something with the fire element, with a particular astrological transit. Maybe there's something happening, like a conjunction between two planets, or an aspect between a constellation and a heavenly body that you want to imbue that crystal with to power up the intention you're carrying out. So that's what I think of charging. I think of charging actually as a more advanced procedure than something like programming, which is pretty basic. And you can program the same way we cleanse, with the breath. So we go through that cleansing breath, and then once the crystal is cleansed and cleared, we shift gears to what are we working on? What is our intention? What is the outcome here? And how can I extend that invitation to the crystal? The goal is we have to generate a strong enough amplitude, or like a loud enough energy field, that we can kind of meet the loudness of the crystal to have that fair exchange of energy. Otherwise, it's always louder than us because it's more organized. More organized systems just have higher amplitudes. It's just the way it works. So we have to get into that same meditative state, and through whatever tactile or sensory input, maybe it's visualization, maybe it's a sense like a scent, a taste, a texture, a touch, whatever you like. If you're a more verbal person, then you can translate that goal into a word, a phrase, an affirmation. But short and succinct is a good way to go. And then in the same kind of manner as before, you can fill yourself with that and then release it in a short and sharp pulse of air through the nose, just like that. You could also, hold it to the heart and repeat an affirmation over and over again. You could hold it to the brow and imagine that you're kind of sending it from your mind into the crystal. And I cover a few of these techniques across my books.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for the segue and the quick little lesson on Marcel Vogel. Thank you. Before we go a little bit deeper into how to work with crystals, have you got a couple of simple techniques that beginners of people working with crystals for the first time, or people that might be hearing this and saying, well, I've been really thinking of working with, whatever stone I've got. And often when people just starting out, depending what their practice is, there may be you may not experience anything at first. So is there a way to trust that it's working, or to feel into the stone in a way that you can maybe it starts getting warm in your hand from holding it after you've worked with your breath? Do you have any tips on that?
Oh, absolutely. So, first and foremost, like, stay the course. You're going to have peers that have experiences that are different to yours. That doesn't mean that your experiences are invalid or wrong or ineffective. Some of us are hardwired to get that kind of tangible sensation, heat, tingling, buzzing, whatever it might be. Other people are more visual. Some people are more on the emotional input, and you get an inner feeling. All of those are equally valid, including not getting anything at all, at least at first. But with practice, we hone our sensitivities. So one of the best things we can do to hone our sensitivities overall is visualization. And I say visualization, but it's not always visual, because some of us are not wired to see internal pictures. So you might be using a script of words or other kind of input. So one of my favorite little techniques that I teach people just getting started is like a crystal contemplation exercise. Start with a stone. A simple one is easier to do this with. Maybe it's a tumble, maybe it's a single point, but something not too complex. And find good lighting. If you've got natural lighting, all the better, but I know that that doesn't always happen depending on where you live and time of day. And just get to know it. So, here I'm holding up this amethyst. I want to like see the edge of every face. I want to see how light reflects off of it. I want to hold it up to the light and look at how light is transformed moving through it. Is it clear? Is it cloudy? Is it opaque? What does it feel like in your hand? What are the surfaces like? Are there textures you can feel but not see? And of course, be smart here. If you have a sharp rock or a delicate rock, don't break it or you to get all the sensory input. But as you do this, if you're a visual person, you might try to recreate the image of it in your mind. If you're a verbal person, maybe you're going to describe a particular view or face or anything, and you want to be able to kind of internalize that. And this does two things. On the first, it's going to build relationship with the stone because you are consciously getting to know it. Just like you take out a new friend for coffee or, go grab lunch with an old friend you haven't caught up with a long time. It's a way to just establish who you are, where you are right here, right now. No expectations. But as our conscious mind is engaged in this, the subconscious, the super consciousness, they can start to move into relationship in a much deeper way. So as you kind of internalize the stone through your visual or other tactile input, you're also internalizing its energy. And you might start to notice things arise. You might feel a certain way, you might see certain things, and you also might not. But the more we do this, the more resonance we're going to build, the more kind of sympathy, empathy we get with that kind of crystal relationship. And then the more attuned we're going to be to the very subtle effects of crystals all around. Doing this with one stone is beneficial because, in a sense, you become more crystalline, but you're also more tuned into crystals as a whole. But doing it with many stones is better because then you start to see patterns. You start to go, wow, when I hold rose quartz, any kind of rose quartz, I feel these general things. When I hold this one particular rose quartz, I feel something different in addition to all those other things. And you start to have your own kind of language, your own lexicon of subtle energy. And it starts with you. And that is the most important data you're going to collect. Absolutely read books, take classes, scroll through memes on the internet, do whatever you can for getting external research, but do your internal, your primary research by building that relationship and just observing. Be curious and see what arises.
That's such a great tip. And I hadn't ever really thought of that as being a beginner tip. It's something whenever I obtain a new crystal, I do that. And this extensive interview continues as part 2 in the following episode, where Nicholas and I chat about crystal grids, otherworldly crystals, and the number of crystal specimens and how these might correspond with planetary, astrological, and elemental energies. I hope you enjoy Crystals with Nicholas Pearson.